Today we tell you some of the most important Audi ownership items. Most of them will have a lot of value, and we might even throw some completely useless info in there. Hello and welcome to Performance on Wheels. My name is Austin and this is my dad Todd, and this is his 2015 Audi A8L 4-liter twin turbo. In today's video we're going to unpack and talk about some very important things. Those items are the following: multi-link suspension and air struts, sway bar end links, and the dreaded 1000 and 3000 RPM exhaust vibration. If this is your guys' first time to Performance on Wheels, welcome. We have a huge amount of different videos here on the channel. We make all types of videos on our own cars, friend cars, dealerships cars, all types of different stuff. So be sure to hit like, hit subscribe, help us grow this father-son team. And now take it away, Dad, Audi A8. I will tell you, if you're a fan of the 4-liter platform, which is what brought me to this A8L 4 liters, twin turbos, like, come on, let's go. ZF 8-speed, this one's a DS1 tune. I'm mentioning all this because this car is for sale. Why is this car for sale? It's because I've had it for like a year, and that's what we do. We explore it, we talk about it, we'll give a year review in a coming video, kind of talk about ownership stuff, but it's time to pass it on. What's cool about this car is you can look back at some of our Audi A8L videos and know the truth of it. You know the truth of what you're getting into with this car. All right, they get it. There's a link down in the description below if you're interested in purchasing this super clean Audi A8L, but let's tell them what they want to hear. To start today's video, we're going to talk about the wonderful multi-link suspension. And why are we talking about this? Because in this 17-foot long boat, it is a common issue. We're talking about a vehicle that is all aluminum, let's not forget that, but it's still heavy. There's a lot of weight up front with that V8 and being 17 feet long. Regardless of how you look at it, there's a lot of weight. The not only air suspension, but the multi-link suspension is known to have issues. If you own one of these cars, you will have to replace these parts at some point of ownership. Now, I am hopeful that by you watching this video, you won't have to go and make some of the same mistakes I made. I have no issue saying that, hey, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty good at figuring stuff out. Usually, it just takes a little bit of time, and that's what I'll share with you in the video related to the suspension, related to the sway bar end links, and then we'll talk about that exhaust vibration. You may notice that we do have a lift in our garage, but it is a 4-post lift. Now, if we had a 2-post lift, I would be all about doing a suspension repair on the lift, but because we had that 4-post, I actually thought it would be easier to tackle my mission from the ground. So obviously starting, if you know anything about the air suspension, you do have to put it into service mode. I will throw that disclaimer out there. I will share with you how I jacked up the car. As you can see here, I actually jacked it up really high off the back or the rear end pad. Pads are huge on the A8. They're very easy to find. So I just used a floor jack to jack it up. And then that allowed me, I went up so high that it allowed me to put a jack stand under the front pad. So that was my tactic to do this safely. Safety first. If you're tackling this, do this safety first. But let's rewind for a second just to talk about why we're even doing this. Shortly after one of my oil changes, I started driving down the road and I noticed every time I was hitting a bump, I was getting this squeak out of the front end. And as time went on, the squeak continued to get worse. I'd wash the car and the squeak would go away. Sometimes the squeak would just happen all the time. It seemed to be coming from the driver end. So me being worst case scenario, I thought the biggest, baddest suspension components, the 2 lower control arms, were what were causing the issue. So I purchased them. Without even doing an inspection, I just went worst case scenario in my mind and I purchased the lower control arms. Jack up the car, take out the inner liner. As you can see, that's a treat to do here. I mean, but once you get it out, it's very easy to see what's going on. And when I started to do my visual inspection, I was like, I don't see anything wrong with these. Like, they look good. I don't see any cracks. I don't see any wear. So then I started to look around more, like, where is this noise coming from if it's not coming from the lower control arms? And there's people in the comments right now that are saying, hey, you idiot, this is what it is. And yeah, I'll get there in a minute, right? So what I found is when I really got some lights out and I got my phone in there to look at the bushings of the upper control arms, I did notice a little bit of cracking. Like
the one side of my shoulder is like, yeah, it's not that bad. This isn't what the noise is. And the other side of my shoulder is, it's cracking. The world's falling apart. So put everything back together, put the liners on, put the tire on, went on to Rock Auto and bought the upper control arms.
My dad here is a worst case scenario type of guy. He always has been. However, right before we get into explaining the rest of this story, I just want to let you guys know about how to properly diagnose what is going on in your Audi's suspension and the easiest way to figure out what is wrong with it before you just start ordering parts. Now, the easiest way to go about this is to jack the vehicle up, and you're actually going to take both of your hands, you're going to shake the wheel back and forth, side to side. Now, if you can feel any movement beyond the wheel actually turning, it means that there's most likely a suspension component loose. When there's side-to-side movement, it usually means an outer tie rod or an inner tie rod. It can also mean the upper and lower control arm. However, the upper and lower control arm, if you actually turn your hands up here and move the wheel side to side, that is usually when you're going to feel some lower control arm play, some strut bushings, and some things like that. So if you feel any movement like that, I suggest getting a second person to come out and help you. Have them shake the wheel as you visually inspect these items. Now, cracking and wear, I would also advise, yes, that usually means that it's about time to replace things when they're starting to get very bad. If you notice some very minimal cracking, it's usually not a big deal. But if you start to see rubber chunks starting to come out and you can get a pry bar in there and see some physical movement, that is how I would go about replacing those. Now, to check the sway bar links, what you're going to do, this is a little bit harder to do on the ground, but ultimately you usually want there to be weight on the vehicle. And if there's not weight on the vehicle, you can still kind of do it, but it's not as easy to diagnose. Take your hand at the end of the actual sway bar itself and just ram it up and down as hard as you possibly can. If you can feel movement in there, your sway bar links are causing a clunk.
Yeah, awesome. Good info, good mechanical. Like, where was he when I was doing this?
My bad.
So I didn't have to go worst case scenario. I will throw in some additional points as the story goes on here. So anyways, we have that air strut suspension in the A8 and some other models. It's not just A8 specific here, because a lot of these suspension components are very similar. May not be identical parts, but the process and the setup is very similar in multiple Audi vehicles. So, get the car jacked back up, take the wheel liner back out, and me and my stubborn mind, I've done my research, I know that everyone says that you actually have to remove the air strut to be able to fully back out the upper control arm bolts. I will say that, like, if your mechanical ability is not awesome, this is really just a nut and bolt job. It is. However, it's all the stuff you have to remove to get there.
It's on the higher side of mechanical knowledge and doability. Anything with a German car, there's usually just a lot more steps to than your average American vehicle.
Yeah, so if you didn't have to remove this air strut and you could just take off the wheel liner and access everything, piece of cake. However, what I found myself doing is peeling back the plastic engine cover so I could access the top of the engine strut, or the air strut, and get to the 4 bolts that are up there. And it wasn't as simple as that, because one of those bolts is actually underneath the strut brace, the engine brace that goes across the top of the car. And I thought it would be as simple as getting my triple square sockets in there and removing the strut, but no, you remove everything and it's still connected somehow. So with a little bit of pry bar, that allowed me just enough room still to get to that final nut so that air strut was free from the top. I was fearful of actually disconnecting the air strut, meaning the air line and the sensor connector, only because I wasn't familiar. I was scared that if I disconnected that stuff, I'd have to plug it. When I plugged it back in, something wouldn't work right, I'd have an alarm. I don't think that's the case, but that's where I was in my mind. So I disconnected everything, all the connection points on the suspension, top to bottom, so that air strut was still in place, connected with its airline, but I could maneuver it just enough to get that top bolt out of both the upper control arms. After all that, I was able to change those upper control arms, but here's what we found. When I was going to put weight back on the suspension before I fully torqued those control arms, now that's a point just to make clear here, before you tighten all those suspension components, get the suspension back to like normal ride height before you crank everything down. So while I was in the process of doing that and putting all the connections back together, I just accidentally hit the sway bar end link. And that's when I heard the noise again.
Now that you heard his poor diagnosis on how to fix a simple solution, this is basically a video telling you what not to do.
Yeah, it is. But like, I'm not mad about this at all, right? Because I have the parts that I know are going to go bad. And by the way, just look at the parts that I took out versus what I put in. This car has 55,000 miles on it. It's a 2015. If this gives you any insight of how clean this car is, but I will also say of how much more life was still in these control arms that I changed out.
Which a lot of people say around 50 to 70,000 miles when you replace them, isn't it?
Yeah, it just depends. It's totally like driving habits. If you're pushing the car hard, if you're in a lot of stop and go traffic, like they're gonna wear out sooner. I was estimating with the control arms that I took out, even though the cracking was very minor, I was assuming I could have easily gone up to 90,000 miles before I was starting to see something.
There you go.
Now what I would add to what you said previously, I was only hearing this squeaking noise when I was going over a bump. There was no clunks, there was no looseness in the steering wheel. So that would be another indicator of a actual control arm, is if like there was something clunking.
Clunks, it would usually come down to either A, sway bar links, or B, something with the strut.
Yeah.
Usually. And then squeaks and looseness in the steering wheel commonly are tie rod ends, inner or outer.
Yeah, so just to keep things moving here, let's move on to the sway bar end links, and this is fun because 80 bucks later, I didn't even have to jack the car up because the 4-post lift came in really handy here. I was able to literally do this job with making these clips in less than 20 minutes. Like 5/8 nuts and bolts. 5/8 hold the nut, 5/8 loosen the nut, take it out, put it in. That's the sway bar end link. Now, going back to the control arm, what I will say is doing that experience, although it wasn't needed, it did boost my confidence of working on the car, so I do appreciate that quite a bit. Since I had the car up in the air and it was on the lift, I've been when I first bought the car, this vibration was not here.
Yeah, this is a super common issue across a lot of Audi platforms, I've heard.
Yeah, so on the 4-liter specifically, it's been a wild goose chase for many years. There's people that say it's the downpipe. There's people that say it's the whole exhaust system. There's people that say it's the flex pipes that are down just past the downpipes or whatever.
So what we're talking about here is when you're cruising at, well, just a normal cruising speed at 1,000 or 3,000 RPMs or maybe in between, basically you can feel a vibration in your seat and in your butt.
And then the floor.
And then the floor, going down the road. Like it's nothing major. It doesn't feel like the car is going to come apart, but it's there.
I would say because I'm driving the car and I'm like over observant to every sound I hear, like freaking out, like, oh, there it is. The engine just blew, like going worst case scenario. It was very noticeable to me. When you're in stop and go traffic, like in rush hour, that's when you hit the 1,000. And if you're doing any sort of performance driving, or if you're using sport mode at all in the transmission, and your like shift points are closer to 3,000, it would feel like the transmission was having trouble shifting, is the way I would describe the feeling of the car. 1,000, 3,000 every time.
Now, this was a very hacky garage fix.
It was, but I plan on doing a full repair of this, but I wanted to verify that it wasn't the downpipes or it wasn't the full exhaust system. So I was going to go to the store and like, I saw some ideas online of like you put some muffler clamps on and then a hanger and you bolt them together just to put some tension on the two exhausts behind the flex pipes. And I was like, I don't want to go spend 15 bucks at the store. I have 3 hose clamps right here.
There you go.
So I take these 3 hose clamps and just tighten them in a manner so they're not touching anything, but they're just putting a little bit of tension towards each other. So it's like adding another layer of support. The vibration is 100% gone, non-existent, can't feel it at all.
There you go.
It's pretty incredible.
Hopefully you guys can learn from some of my dad's mistakes here, but also gain some confidence from the fact that he managed to pull the entire suspension apart just sitting on the garage here, and he didn't have a hard time doing it.
No.
So maybe you can gain some confidence in your Audi A8 purchase in the sense where, as you can see, we didn't have any major mechanical failures. Like the the thing's pretty solid, reliable. It's a good car. We do highly recommend it. And yeah, next Audi A8 video is going to be coming soon. And that's going to be on the full 1 year, over 20,000 mile review on the A8L. So we've had quite a few behind the wheel hours here. And it's been a great car, a lot of road trips, and it is for sale. So once again, links down in the description. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the video here on Performance on Wheels. We look forward to seeing you soon.